Welcome to the WTR Healthcare Spotlight podcast. I'm your host, Tim Gerdeman, Vice Chair and Co-founder and Chief Marketing Officer of Water Tower Research. In today's podcast episode, I'm being joined by Dr. David Mazzo, President and CEO of Lisata Therapeutics, along with the company's Chief Medical Officer and Executive Vice President of R&D, Dr. Kristen Buck. Also joining is my Water Tower Research Equity Research colleague, Robert Sassoon. Lisata is a clinical stage pharmaceutical company dedicated to developing and commercializing a novel solid tumor targeting and penetration technology with tumor microenvironment modifying properties. Lisata trades on NASDAQ under ticker symbol LSTA. So without further ado, good morning, David, Kristen, and Robert, and welcome to today's podcast.
Thanks, Tim. Good morning to you and to the listeners as well.
Good morning, both.
And good morning to you, and nice to see you, David and Kristen.
Thanks, Robert.
David and Kristen, before I hand over the podcast to Robert to ask a few questions, let me kick things off by asking each of you to tell our listeners a bit about your respective professional backgrounds, please.
So I'll let Kristen go first, and I'll follow in that regard.
Thanks, Dave. I'm Dr. Kristen Buck. I'm the Head of Research and Development and Chief Medical Officer at Lisata. I've been here about 4 years. I'm an internal medicine physician by training. I was in private practice. I spent several years as an FDA medical officer, spent about 6 years at AstraZeneca leading one of their large clinical outcome trials. Thereafter, I went to be Chief Medical Officer of a global medical device company, and then I held several senior leadership drug development roles at Quintiles, which became IQVIA, and Optum, where I developed drugs across every therapeutic indication. And prior to coming to Lisata, where I found my home, I was the Chief Medical Officer of the Global Contract Research Organization, ICON.
And then from my background, I'm actually a PhD-trained chemist who did some postdoctoral work in Switzerland. So I have an international background educationally. I've been in the pharmaceutical industry my entire career, which is now more than 40 years, more than half of that as an executive in research and development in big pharma, having had the opportunity to run pharmaceutical development for Rhône-Poulenc-Rohr out of the Paris headquarters, for Hoechst Marin Roussel out of their Frankfurt headquarters and Bridgewater, US headquarters, and then ultimately as the head of development operations for Schering-Plough based here in New Jersey. Since the early 2000s, I've been in emerging pharma companies, developing products throughout my career across all therapeutic areas and at all stages of development. And I've also been a private and public company board director and chairman of the board as well.
Those are great backgrounds. Thanks for sharing. So now I'll turn it over to Robert to ask a few questions.
Thanks, Tim. So, David, there may be listeners to this podcast that are not particularly familiar with Lisata. So can you start by giving us an overview of your pipeline?
Well, certainly. So our pipeline is really focused on the broad application of a single compound being developed essentially as a platform. That compound is called Certepetide. As indicated in the introduction, it is a compound that has tumor targeting and penetration enhancement properties, as well as tumor microenvironment modification properties. It's meant to be used as an anti-cancer adjuvant. It's administered or co-administered with other anti-cancer agents. And its principal effect is to improve the efficacy of those co-administered agents while not exacerbating the safety profile of those agents. And we've had the opportunity to develop Certepetide across a variety of solid tumor indications. The most advanced work is being done in various types of pancreatic cancer, but we also have studies that are looking at glioblastoma, cholangiocarcinoma, appendiceal cancer, colorectal cancer, and others. And so that's really the focus. For pancreatic cancer, we've just recently completed and have reported results from a phase 2b trial, and we're in phase 3 preparations for that indication. Many of the other trials are nearing completion in what we would call proof of concept stage in the clinic.
Thanks for that. So let me now turn to Kristen. Can you explain what type of compound Certepetide is, the science behind it, and what differentiates it from the current treatment landscape for these very difficult cancers that you are targeting, like pancreatic cancer and glioblastoma?
Certainly. So Certepetide is an investigational product. It's designed to activate, as Dave said, a novel cellular uptake pathway that allows systemically co-administered or tethered anti-cancer drugs to target and penetrate solid tumors. Because most solid tumors have evolved to form a dense stromal barrier, which basically limits the penetration of chemotherapy or immunotherapy. To overcome this, in the past, physicians such as myself have given prolonged or escalating doses of chemotherapy, and that leads to basically off-target effects or eventually, or worse, patient death. Certepetide was designed as a 9-amino acid cyclic peptide. It essentially hijacks the cell's naturally occurring transport system, basically turning that barrier of a stroma into a conduit, allowing more anti-cancer drug to get into the tumor. As Dave said, furthermore, Certepetide modifies that hostile tumor microenvironment. Tumors have a way of cloaking themselves from the immune system, and Certepetide has been shown to reduce regulatory T cells, enhance cytotoxic T cells, the cells that kill tumors, making the tumors more susceptible to immunotherapy and our own immune system. As Dave said, Certepetide is given intravenously. It's over a 1-minute IV push. It's given alongside or concomitant to the regimen of standard chemotherapy or immunotherapy. And remarkably, Certepetide's been given to over 360 patients now, and its safety profile remains very favorable. In fact, the side effect profile reflects the drug with which it's given. Why is it novel? I'd say given its mechanism, it will increase the efficacy of both established and emerging anti-cancer drugs. So for indications like pancreatic cancer or glioblastoma, brain cancer, as the treatment paradigm changes, Certepetide will likely remain a viable synergistic treatment option.
So it's a pretty much a facilitator, would you say?
Yes.
Right, great. So let's talk about your most advanced program. You recently reported some results from the Ascend phase 2b study. Can you explain to us the main goals of that program, how the results have panned out against those goals, and the next steps for the program?
Sure. So the Ascend trial, it's a phase 2b trial. It's in first-line metastatic pancreatic cancer patients, and it's being conducted in Australia and New Zealand. We inherited that trial upon the acquisition of Ascend Therapeutics in September of 2022. And the trial is basically a double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized in 2-to-1 fashion, multi-center trial evaluating our drug Certepetide in combination with standard of care chemotherapy, gemcitabine, and nab-paclitaxel. When we inherited the trial, the protocol was sort of academically designed. It included one dosing schema for Certepetide. It was a powered study for a 6-month primary endpoint. A 6-month PFS primary endpoint. But after we acquired the asset, we worked with the sponsor of the study, AGITG, to amend the protocol to make it more effectively guiding our next stages of development. Specifically, we added a median overall survival endpoint. We amended the protocol to include a second cohort, cohort B, to assess 2 different dosing regimens of Certepetide. The first being cohort A with the single dose, which is 95 patients receiving a single dose of 3.2 milligrams per kilogram, and the cohort we added, which was cohort B, 63 patients with a 2-to-1 randomization receiving 2 doses of Certepetide 4 hours apart. So the goal of this trial was really to further corroborate the phase 1 data we had that Certepetide remains a safe, well-tolerated drug, but further to demonstrate whether this drug has an effect in a metastatic pancreatic patient population. You may have seen we gave preliminary data from cohort A at ASCO GI in January of 2025, which the data were encouraging. The median overall survival demonstrated for cohort A was about 12.7 versus 9.7. It was not powered for that. And despite a numerical trend in the primary endpoint, 6-month PFS favoring Certepetide, there was no significant improvement in the median PFS. But importantly, the objective response rate truly favored Certepetide with 4 complete responses in the Certepetide treated arm versus 0 in placebo.
Yeah.
You may have seen.
Yeah, sorry, carry on.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So you
I'm
may
just
have.
going to add that pancreatic cancer and actually is probably the lowest, has the lowest survival rate, maybe at the moment, despite the fact there's been such great achievements in developments in oncology in general. It's still one of these very hard to treat diseases.
It's considered almost the most difficult to
Right.
treat cancer, right? And to have 4 complete responses, we were quite encouraged. And just to continue, we received preliminary data for cohort B, and we reported that at ESMO GI just several weeks ago, early July. And we also received encouraging data. We had a near statistical improvement in median PFS at 7.5 versus 4.7 months, an improvement numerically in median overall survival, and again, overall objective response rate 45% versus 19%, favoring Certepetide. So that we've amassed a lot of data demonstrating the drug is definitely effective, and importantly, the adverse event profile for both cohorts A and B were similar to that of placebo. I mean, the data are seminal in that we have been able to go to FDA with the 2-dose regimen with a phase 3 design and get agreement with FDA on our phase 3 design herein.
That's great. David, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, the only thing that I would add is that, as Kristen pointed out, the goals of this program, it's a phase 2B program. And, a lot of times, especially in oncology, people mix the objectives of phase 2B with those of phase 3. And phase 2B, is frequently not powered for efficacy, but is designed to demonstrate consistency of behavior from what was observed in phase 1 and phase 2A, to give you a reasonable estimate of therapeutic effect size so that you know how to power what would hopefully be a successful phase 3, to confirm that tolerance and safety remains acceptable in a broader population, and to be in a situation to have defined what you believe is the appropriate dosing regimen to minimize risk going into phase 3, or at least define the range of doses that should be tested in a phase 3 trial. And to that end, the ASCEND trial has been a complete success because we have accomplished all of those goals. And as Kristen pointed out, we are now in preparation for phase 3, having already crossed the major milestone of getting an agreement on a protocol with FDA for a phase 3 trial, and in the process of designing a globally executable phase 3 program for the compound in metastatic pancreatic cancer.
Right. That's very encouraging. So, David, just sticking with you, partnerships are not uncommon in the biotech or pharma world, but they seem to carry a lot of weight as far as Lisata is concerned. So, can you explain the importance of the specific partnerships that you have and their main benefits to Lisata from a strategic and financial perspective?
Well, certainly. I think I can address them somewhat in chronologic order. So, one of the most important financial partnerships at the moment is with Qilu Pharmaceutical, our partner for Greater China. They've licensed the rights to Certepetide for Greater China. They've already paid us tens of millions of dollars in milestone payments, and we're due, tens or maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars in future milestones as they move the product through development. They have indicated to us their intention to move to phase 3 sometime later this year, which would prompt another significant milestone payment to us. And of course, once they get the product approved in China, we are eligible to receive substantial royalties on sales. So that's a very important program financially, and I would say medically, because even though medical practice is slightly different in China, what we are seeing is consistency of data response and behavior from the compound in the Chinese medical population and medical patients, as we see in the West. And so that's really very important. We also have a strong relationship with Warp9, which is a foundation in Australia, which is paying for a number of our trials in that area, looking at a variety of indications in the gastrointestinal cancer world. And with AGITG, as Kristen mentioned earlier, which is a clinical trialist group with which we've formed an alliance, and they are executing much of the work for example, the ASCEND trial. More recently, we've formed some, I think, very important strategic alliances. We've recently announced a research collaboration with Catalent, where Catalent will be utilizing Certepetide in combination, either chemically conjugated or co-administered with their antibody drug conjugate platform, developing new compounds for the clinic. And we expect, based upon some early data from that we can see some evolution of that relationship, perhaps as early as between now and the end of the year. We also have a relationship with a very exciting artificial intelligence discovery company called JTC Health. We have a strategic collaboration with them. We've become essentially the development arm of GATC for many of the products that are coming out of their discovery engine and translating those discoveries to human clinical data and hopefully eventually products. And we may see a further evolution of that collaboration as well. So those are just a few of the examples. And as you might expect, based upon both the data from the ASCEND phase 2b and also the recently reported data from a study called LSTA, which looks at the combination of cytotoxics with immunotherapy and Certepetide in a variety of cancers. We are advancing, I think, very, very positively our discussions with a variety of big pharma companies looking to form partnerships or license arrangements with them to ease the financial burden on Lisata of the further development of the compound through to commercialization.
I just want to thanks for that. I just want to actually add a follow-up question. When people look at your clinical investigations, they will probably observe that most of these are actually conducted outside the United States. So what's the strategic rationale for that?
Well, I think the decision to do a trial in a particular geography has a number of factors that play into that decision. First, you want to be sure that you have the appropriate patient demographics and appropriate medical practice so that you're doing a trial in a place that is representative of the rest of the world, and that the population is available, that the prevalence of the disease exists so you can recruit the trial effectively. The other major factor is cost. So you try to look for places where you can keep the costs minimized with the quality high. And cost is a function of time and of also direct expense. And so you're looking for places where the US dollar is strong, where the costs are either supplemented by local governments or agencies, and where you have the opportunity to recruit more rapidly. And so that comes into play in all these decisions. And so when we looked at things, we have, for example, our bolster trial, which is in cholangiocarcinoma, is running here in the United States because that was the best geography after evaluation of those combination of factors. Many of our other trials are running in other parts of the world. The GBM, glioblastoma trial, is running in Estonia and Latvia. And that's because there's a very high prevalence in those areas. The medical community quality is very high and the costs are lower than the United States. And we use Australia and New Zealand frequently, as do many other companies, because Australia offers a very attractive R&D rebate for doing work in their country, which makes the cost somewhere between 40 and 60% lower than doing it in North America. So those are the reasons why we go overseas. But of course, as you go into later stages of development, you will clearly have a large percentage of your patient population being studied in the United States, if not North America, as well as Europe, because you'd like to do those studies so that they're effectively useful for registrations globally.
That's a great analysis. Thanks for that. Finally, from me, can you highlight the key anticipated milestones over the next 12 to 18 months for Lisata?
Sure. I think, I'll speak to some of the business things that we're anticipating, but I'll let Kristen summarize first what she's expecting on a clinical front and an R&D front over the next 6 to 9 months.
Yes, I mean, I think first and foremost, we're looking for the final ASCEND data, and that should come somewhere at the end of this year. our own homegrown bolster trial in first and second line cholangiocarcinoma, we should be getting first line overall survival data at some point at the end of this year. And that's the backbone of gem and cisplatin on top of Certepetide. And, as Dave alluded, we have a very exciting trial called LSTA, which is a backbone of cytotoxics and durvalumab in locally advanced non-resectable pancreatic cancer. The last patient was just treated, and we would be getting PFS data somewhere at the end of this year as well. So really a lot of data rich time at the end of this year. We'll be looking for our drug to demonstrate its effect.
And I'll point out that on our website, in our corporate presentation, there is a milestone slide that projects the timing for all of these and others that are either execution or data milestones that I think would be interesting to the listeners. Now, on the business front, as I've already alluded, we've had a number of announcements recently about collaborations and advancements, and we would expect some others. So just yesterday, we announced something that I think is really critical to the value of the compound and the company, which was a new composition of matter patent for Certepetide that effectively extends its protection out into the 2040s, which is obviously a major value creator. We, as I've already said, expect to be in a position to announce more news on the evolution of our relationship with Catalent, as well as our relationship with GATC over the course of the remainder of this year. And we're looking forward very much to announcing, additional partnerships with other companies with whom we are currently in discussion. So I think there'll be a number of business type milestones announced that will be complementary to those that go along with clinical execution and data.
Thanks. So interesting times for Lisata, and we're definitely going to follow and monitor everything that comes out of your company. Anyway, thank you again, David and Kristen. It's very useful information for the people who are listening into this podcast and for us. And back to you, Tim.
Thank you, Robert. And Kristen, I would be remiss to say that you, if I didn't say that you actually just made me feel old when you mentioned paclitaxel, because I was a publishing sell-side analyst in the 90s covering a publicly traded entity called Hauser Chemical, which was kind of the one-trick pony in extracting paclitaxel from Pacific yew trees. So you just took me back quite a while. So thank you for joining us today, Dr. David Mazzo and Dr. Kristen Buck of Lisata Therapeutics, NASDAQ ticker symbol LSTA. And thanks to my equity research colleague, Robert Sassoon, for also joining. Finally, a special thanks to the WTR producer and editor of the podcast, Joe Brunetto. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, as well as visiting www.watertowerresearch.com to stay up to speed on the company's small cap written research reports, podcasts, fireside chats, and conference schedules. We will see you next time for another edition of the WTR Healthcare Spotlight podcast.